We think women need to talk more openly about money because money really matters. It shouldn't be embarrassing or confusing. Join the conversation. We'll be discussing a whole range of topics which will help you get comfortable with your finances. Money Matters. Brought to you by AJ Bell.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the AJ Bell Money Matters podcast. I'm Laura, and this week we are going to hear from a couple of mums who wanted to be able to work around school hours, and so they decided to set up their own business to do just that.
Hello, I'm Danni. Nice to be back with you all. Yeah, we've spoken a lot, Laura, about the impact that having children can have on women's financial lives, the motherhood penalty it's often called. And when we came across the Biskery and heard Saskia and Lisa's story, how they created a business that not only supports their lifestyle, but has given other mums a job that works around school hours, we just wanted to share it with you all.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's always inspiring to hear how people are juggling parenthood and working, whether that's full-time work, stay-at-home mum, working for yourself. There's obviously lots of different ways to try and make it work. But I think whatever route you take, it always feels like a bit of a juggle, particularly in busy weeks, which Danni and I have very much had recently.
Oh, yes. I remember when my kids were little, the school holidays, that long summer 6 weeks was always just horrendous to plan for. And I had to create spreadsheets just so I knew exactly who was looking after the kids when, where they were going, you know, a lot of grandma help in order to make sure that everything ran smoothly. But it's hard juggling, especially if, like me, I wanted to keep working because I just felt like when I was at home, it was lovely, but I sort of lost myself a little bit. I couldn't have stayed at home, just been a stay-at-home mum. I take my hats off to women that can do that.
Yeah, same. And I think there's that, I was talking about it with friends yesterday at a fourth birthday party, which is my social life these days. And we were talking about how someone there was saying, I can't imagine being able to afford for both of us not to be working full time. But then likewise, I've got friends who, because of the cost of childcare and because they've got multiple young children who they're needing to pay childcare for, they can't afford to work because those childcare costs are so high. And we're going to touch on childcare costs in a minute, but it just shows that there's lots of different challenges that different families face, isn't there? Some people really need that salary that comes from both working full time, but then that does make it quite the juggle, particularly if you throw in commuting, throw in maybe multiple children at different schools or nurseries, and then the dreaded winter illnesses come, and that definitely feels like the crunch period in this house is when your child is sick off nursery, but you both still are meant to be working and trying to juggle all of that.
It does get easier, but now I get those late night phone calls from the eldest who is almost 18 and needs to pass her driving test saying, "Can you pick me up?" Yeah. It's like, great.
The perils of being a parent taxi service. But if you're a regular listener, you'll know that this podcast is all about helping women get more comfortable with their financial lives. So tackling issues like childcare that we just touched on, or workplace equality and the gender pay gap. Sometimes it feels a bit overwhelming. So it's really great to share these real life stories where women have been empowered to make decisions that work for them, for their lives and for their families.
Before we properly introduce our guests, we always on this podcast cover off one big thing. And there is nothing bigger than a new government and the potential impact that could have on our personal finances.
Yes, we are recording this just a few days after Labour's landslide election victory. So it is very early days. We've had a few statements from different people in the new government so far, but not a huge amount of detail yet. But we do know quite a lot about their intentions and what their intentions are when it comes to our money, even if we don't know the nitty-gritty detail just yet.
Yeah, absolutely. The manifesto spelt out a couple of key promises, particularly in terms of tax. So if you are working and you're hyper aware of how much is being deducted from your pay packet every month, then Labour have said that they're not intending to put up income tax, national insurance, VAT or corporation tax. Now, that, of course, lends itself to some big questions about how on earth they're going to pay to deliver all the growth and to improve public services and all the things that they've been talking about throughout the election, because that's about 75% of the tax take. So there's an awful lot of speculation there that there might be some tinkering elsewhere. But I think it's also really important to remember that although they're promising not to put up taxes, they kind of already are, because they have said that they won't remove that threshold freeze, which is dragging lots of people for the first time into paying tax, pushing people up to different tax bands. Fiscal drag is the term which is used an awful lot, and it does feel like a drag for many people. And there were some numbers from the Institute for Fiscal Studies reckoned that by 2028, which is when the freeze might end, might not end, let's see, but it equals a 6% increase on the basic rate of tax. And can you imagine if we had an extra 6p put on the basic rate of tax, the uproar that would have created?
I know, and so I think the challenge for Labour here is they've not said that they're going to end this freeze, and that's because ending this freeze comes with a huge price tag, because at the moment it's generating a lot of money for the government, as those figures from the IFS highlighted. So for Labour to say, right, we're going to end this freeze, we're going to restore those income tax thresholds back to where they were, will cost them a lot of money. And so maybe politically it's easier to blame the Tories for having brought in this policy and then just allow it to continue, because as we have heard from the new Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, in one of her first speeches or statements, there is not a lot of money to play with when it comes to their spending. A very frank assessment from her there on kind of the assessment of the country's finances. And that has led that their manifesto promises on not raising certain taxes, and the fact that there is not a lot of money sloshing around for the government to spend, has led to a lot of rumours about what they are going to do with other taxes that they've not, stipulated on. And I think we had this kind of vacuum of information from Labour in terms of key policies, areas where they were going to raise money. And that led to just so many rumours ahead of the election. And I'm sure that will continue until their first kind of economic update or budget or whatever they end up calling it. And so the big ones where there have been lots of rumours is capital gains tax. So talk of whether they might raise that tax or whether they might change the thresholds, reduce the tax-free amount, which has already been dramatically reduced over the past couple of years by the Tories. And then the other key one that's been key in the rumour mill is inheritance tax. Always one that's talked about, always one that gets some scrutiny anytime there's kind of a general election or a political moment. And so I think really all we're seeing at the moment is rumours. We've had no confirmation. Labour have trotted out the line a lot of times when it comes to lots of different policy of they haven't ruled it out or they have no plans to, which obviously just leaves that door open for rumours to start. But until we know anything concrete, then it's not worth, factoring into your financial plans, because we are just working on rumours and speculation. And I think what will be really key is that first economic update, budget, autumn statement, whatever you badge it as, from Labour, which we're expecting to come. The date hasn't been confirmed yet, but we're expecting to come kind of mid to late September. And that will really be their first point to truly lay out their plans of spending, the direction of the economy, how they're going to get that UK growth, but also crucially any changes to taxes.
And we should get the date for that budget, fiscal event, whatever you want to call it, before summer recess. That's what Rachel Reeves has been saying today, and that she's going to make sure that there is enough time for the OBR to do all the things that it needs to do to give the kind of scrutiny, of course, that we remember wasn't in evidence in that particular quasi-Kwarteng Liz Truss budget, which created, should we say, quite an explosion in financial markets.
It was memorable. It was a memorable budget, but I think for all the wrong reasons. So I definitely think politicians have learned their lesson from that one, that you need to get the ABRs kind of costings, not stamp of approval, but their oversight of it, if you don't want to cause mass panic, crash markets, all of these things.
Now, one of the things that we do know about Labour's plans, because they made quite a big deal of it in their manifesto, and we wanted to talk about this because there's an awful lot about employment law and how particularly it relates to women. So they have said that this plan to make work pay will be followed by a new employment bill that's expected within 100 days of the new government getting their feet under the table. And there's quite a lot in it. Now, we don't quite know whether or not all of it will be within this employment bill. We don't know what kind of consultation will happen. A lot of this at the moment we're still sort of speculating on, but there's a lot of talk about the minimum wage, reflecting a genuine living wage. Of course, we've got the Living Wage Society, different figure attached to that, and also saying that they want to make that living wage the same regardless of adults' age. So from 18 plus, they'd get the same amount rather than it changing at 21. Also committed to strengthening women's rights to equal pay, and they've said that they're going to take steps to reduce the gender pay gap. We talk about the gender pay gap a lot on this podcast, Laura, because it's a huge factor in the amount of cash that women have to then invest for their futures, to spend on doing things that they want to do with their lives. And one of the things that they want to do is introduce mandatory, more in detail pay gap reports. So that's for employers with 250 staff or more. So that's going to be a really interesting one to follow. And we've spoken about the menopause here and the impact that that has on women and their ability to remain in the workplace. And one key proposal is that, again, employers with more than 250 employees will be required to produce menopause action plans to show how they will support employees going through the menopause, and for all employers to publish measures on things like uniform, temperature, flexible working and leave. So a lot of the things that we have been talking to women about, some of the things that they say would really help them be able to stay in a workplace when they're going through the menopause. There's a commitment to strengthening the legal duty for employers to prevent sexual harassment. Also, an indication that maybe we could get dual discrimination introduced. So 20 new dual protective characteristics are expected. So if you're older and female, you could bring a discrimination claim based on that combined characteristic. And it's something we've spoken with Noon about quite a lot, that sort of midlife, suddenly feeling that you are invisible. There's also something we've spoken about before, which is paternity leave, available to fathers from their first day in the job rather than after 26 weeks of continuous employment. Now, I must stress that's leave, not pay. But there's an awful lot, things like ending net zero contracts, giving employment rights to people on day one of employment. So an awful lot for Labour to really get their teeth stuck into in that first 100 days. And a lot of it could really resonate with women's experience in the workplace.
Yeah, and I think, we talk a lot about childcare, and we talked about it at the start of this podcast, but that's another kind of key area, childcare and schooling, where Labour had a fair amount in their policy, but we need to see more detail. The big one, obviously, the big headline grabber was the plan to introduce VAT for private schools. We need to see the detail of how that will be implemented, exactly when it will come in place, but we know that it is coming, and that will have a big impact for those families who do pay for schooling for their children. We've seen some figures out, various surveys from various places talking about the number of parents that will now opt to put their children into state school because private school will be too expensive. But we also know that those private schools don't have to pass on all of that cost increase, and they will be able to offset some of that cost increase. So a lot to be seen there in terms of how that's implemented when it comes into place, but also how private schools actually handle it and how much of that cost they pass on. And then the other areas that Labour talked about is they committed to continuing that extension of free childcare hours that the Tories had brought in and had a plan in place for. So that means that for 9-month-olds, they will be able to access 30 hours of free childcare all the way up until when they go to school. For working parents, there's certain criteria around it, but Labour have committed to continuing that Tory policy, and so that will come into place from September next year. So that's good news that that's continuing. And then Labour also had some plans in place for creating lots more nursery places, creating breakfast clubs at schools to provide more affordable or free childcare for parents, for working parents who need to use things like breakfast club and after school club. But I think what we really need to see is the detail of how they're going to do that. So how are they going to create those new nursery places? How are they going to encourage staff into the workforce? Is there capacity in nurseries for those additional places? Is it just staffing that's an issue, or is it space? And will those places be in the places where there is actually the biggest need? And the same with breakfast clubs. Just because there's spare classrooms at school doesn't mean that you can instantly set up a breakfast club in that classroom. So I think another one again where we need to see a lot more detail in terms of how that will be implemented, how much actual funding there will be for that from the government, or whether it will be changing certain policies and rules that enable schools to be able to do it more easily, but footing the cost themselves. A lot still to be seen, but a lot of good positive kind of action there, and a lot of potential stuff that could help people who are struggling with high childcare costs, not just at nursery level, but once their children are at school and they're having to pay for, breakfast club, after school club, or like you said, Danny, school care, so activity and holiday clubs in the school holidays when people don't have family around that can help.
Yeah, it is so expensive having children and having to pay for all those things. And of course, this is something that Labour, this new government, is going to have to wrestle with, because that there isn't a magic money tree that families can shake, and certainly there isn't one that the government can shake. And the devil will absolutely be in the detail. And of course, a lot of the changes that they're talking about making to employment law, that is going to have a knock-on for employers. And I know a lot of small businesses in particular have been saying, look, we're already struggling with this increase in the national living wage. We're already in a situation where potentially we've got to put our prices up just at a time when everyone's saying, hey, inflation, prices should be coming down, because inflation is not as going up as quickly as it was. So yeah, it's very much that sort of push-pull at the moment, I think, with an awful lot of the pledges that they made and the priorities they've got for that first few weeks. We do need to see what they intend to do and how they intend to mitigate some of the fallout.
And I think one of the other areas that we've not touched on yet is kind of, they've talked a lot about getting more investment into the UK. Now, obviously, they've got a limited ability to spend money on that. So that's about getting external investment, but also investment from individuals. We know that the Tories were also trying to tackle this. And one of their suggestions was with the UK ISA or the British ISA. It seems to have two names, even though it doesn't exist yet. And this was an additional ISA allowance each year, but only if you invest in UK companies or certain approved UK investments. So Labour now has the decision about whether it continues with that proposal or whether it takes a different route, whether instead it chooses to simplify the entire ISA landscape. So we know now that ISAs have gone from quite a simple account to we now have 6 different types of ISA. So there's definitely a lot of scope there. It's something that Labour have talked about before, simplifying ISAs, but haven't added any more meat on the bones to that statement. And so I think we'll really be looking for whether ISAs could be simplified, and that would help encourage more people to engage with them and then invest in UK companies and the companies around the world, or whether that's one of the routes that they're going to take, whether they continue with the UK ISA, or if there's a whole other idea that they've got that we just don't know about yet.
The one thing that we do know is they've said that they will continue with the triple lock, but They are not committing to a quad lock, which is, of course, that handy little phrase which was being bandied about by the Conservatives in the general election campaign, which would have effectively removed the freeze on tax thresholds for pensioners as the state pension gets ever closer to the point where pensioners are going to have to pay tax on it. And that is an issue that's not going to go away, but it would be incredibly unpopular to younger generations if the thresholds were continued to be frozen for working people, but were got rid of for were changed for pensioners. So I do think that pensions, the state pension, is going to be a huge issue for Labour, this government, to have to deal with over this Parliament, because we're an ageing population and the cost of the state pension is just going up and up and up. And at some point, I think that a really serious discussion about the future of the state pension, the triple lock, the age at which we access our pension is going to have to take place.
Definitely. And as we get more of those updates, more concrete detail, we will update you in future episodes of the podcast.
Okay, let's crack on with our guest interview for this episode. Saskia Roskam and Lisa Shepherd never set out to be bakers or even necessarily to create their own business, but sometimes life has a way of taking you where you need to go. They did always want to be able to work, but not at the expense of spending time with their children, doing the school run, taking part in after-school activities.
So they created the Biskery, a Leeds-based bakery that specialises in branded and personalised biscuits, and they made it mum-friendly with an employment model that gives other mums opportunities to work around their caring responsibilities. And they think that working with women and mothers enriches the business, not puts it at risk.
Saskia and Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. Look, for people that don't know who you are, what business you run, just tell me a bit about the Biskery. Lisa, why don't you start?
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, thanks for having us. We are an online bakery specializing in branded and personalized biscuits, and we are completely run by women, and most of us are working mums.
That seems like an idea of utopia for a lot of working mums, but I bet trying to sort of pull that all together to start that journey must have been incredibly difficult, Saskia.
Yeah, and I'll be honest and say that we didn't plan or set out or write a business plan to create what we have now. Really, Lisa and I met each other at a digital marketing agency in 2013, and we both come from European countries. Lisa's from Germany, I'm from the Netherlands, and we really missed the taste of certain bakes from our home countries. So we just looked at each other and said, hey, why don't we just start baking and selling it at a local market? So we did that once a month, roughly. And but because we come from a digital marketing background, we figured businesses have websites, so we should probably build a website. So we had our first market stall and we went live with our website the same day. And that's unbeknownst to us how this business was born. And then we proceeded over the next 4-5 years to gradually build this business alongside our day jobs. So yeah, it was not a overnight success story. But because the driver mainly was to build a life that would work better around our children than the digital marketing jobs did, we wrote that blueprint that would suit us. So when it came to hiring, it was only natural to us that we would extend it to our team members as well and say, we're mums, we're working school hours. If that works for you, then that's fine. And that's how we attracted
people into our business. So again, it wasn't necessarily a plan, but it was just something that we represented and that was important for us. And then it became this slightly unconventional and different business model. And so far it's working. So we're keeping going.
So how does it work, Saskia? Actually, do you only open in school hours, or do you have different kinds of shifts depending on different people's caring responsibilities?
Yeah, so when we started employing people in 2021, we only opened school hours. So we were in from 9:30 to 2:30. So which meant that everybody could drop their kids, drive to the kitchen, and leave in time to pick up the kids again at 3 o'clock. We've since then, in communication with our team, extended our business hours on a Monday and a Tuesday. So we are open until 6 o'clock on those days. But the other 3 days, we still pretty much stop at 2:30, unless, there's huge orders coming in and we have to extend hours. We get external help in. We've got a lot of people that we can call if we need some extra hands on the pump.
Lisa, there must have been a great deal of pressure at certain points when, business starts to pick up, when you're talking about money. There must have been pressure to go a more traditional route for the business.
There wasn't. We have no investors behind us, so we're fully bootstrapped. So we never had to report to anyone or had to speed up our growth for, reasons that weren't, inside our own control. So the pressure really was to not only talk the talk, but walk the walk. So we set out to create a life that would prioritize our children. But when it gets really busy, that's really hard to do. So I think that is the bigger pressure, that the constant guilt of I've got this lovely business that's doing really well. I've got these team members that have mortgages. So I can't just, go to the park with my kids right now if there's a huge client calling me up. So that is more the pressures that we're still experiencing. Being a business owner, still being a business owner. But we are getting better at, getting the right team members, getting, increasing their hours to a certain extent, getting people who are maybe at a different stage in their motherhood. So one team member has an older child, so she, he doesn't need her as much. So, it's just, it's really fluid.
Saskia, what do your kids think and your partner?
I think my son, funny enough, when he was younger, he used to say that I didn't work. Daddy goes to work, but you don't work, because they never saw me working, because I was there at the drop off. I was there at the pickup. He was like, well, she surely is not working. We would bake in the evening when they'd gone to bed. So it was invisible to them, really. But then a few weeks ago, I would pick my daughter up from school, and we were driving back in the car, and we drove past the Biskery because we live right next to it, and the shutters were down. And my daughter looked at me and she said, "Every time I pass the Biskery, the shutters are down." And I was like, "Yes, Tom, that's intentionally. We've built this business so that we could close the shutters and go home and be with you guys." And she then said, "That makes me feel very, very special, Mama." And that was just okay, I think it's all good. It's all fine. All the sacrifice, all the hard work, all the invisibility to my children of me actually grafting, it's fine.
Lisa?
My kids are possibly a bit too little. They're 6 and 9. So the only little anecdote I have is that when we were still baking from home, obviously they did see the work a lot more, because especially Christmas, there were boxes and boxes stacked everywhere. And my daughter would just walk in one morning and say, "How many more biscuits do people need?" And now, when you're elbow grease, we're a lot more. So they do not quite appreciate it just yet. But every now and then when things get stressful and they don't appreciate me, I say, well, you could also go to after school club. And then, you don't have to deal with annoying mom. And they're like, no, we want to spend the afternoon with you. I was like, okay, because, I built a whole business around it. So you better want to spend time with me.
So you said that it's bootstrapped, so you haven't got external investment. So how did you go at starting the business? Because that must have taken, first of all, an awful lot of work, but also quite a leap of faith.
Yeah, I mean, like we said, we didn't start it with the intention of necessarily building what it is now. So in 2016, both Lisa and me put £500 into the business over the course of, I think, about 3 months. And it was to pay for our domain name. It was to pay for the market stall. It was to pay for props at that market stall. It was to pay for ingredients, things like that. And to date, that is the only monetary investment that Lisa and me have put into the business. We have had a few grants here and there, but nothing major. And what we did is we just didn't pay ourselves for 3 years. Maybe when we're at the market, we could treat each other. Would you like a coffee? Yeah, should we take it from the money box? Yeah, let's do that. And then after those first 3 years, when we started to get a little bit of traction in the B2B side of the business, we paid ourselves a little bit of money, which meant that we could reduce the hours that we were working in our day job, essentially. So we reduced them by a day or 2 days. And then, we just slowly just reinvested until 2020, when obviously COVID hit. I was made redundant, and I had to jump into the business with everything and all the energy that that we could throw at it at the time. And 3 months later, Lisa quit her job, and we both went full team, and we hired our first employees.
Lisa, that must have been quite the moment, dealing with COVID and lockdown, and I'm guessing homeschooling as well, then to suddenly have this business baby that has gone from being just a market stall hobby to being, a full-time role.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to do it again, I'm not going to lie. It was, yeah, sometimes we look back and we think, how on earth did we do this? But it's... can't quite remember the quote now, but something like, obsessed is just the term the lazy use to describe the dedicated. And I think it's a bit like that you have to be a little bit obsessed. And we couldn't even totally see what we were building. But I think that is what entrepreneurship so often is, that you kind of chipping away at something in the dark, and at some point you see the outline, and that's how it felt for us. We just couldn't stop. There was something we couldn't see it yet, but we couldn't stop. So that's, I guess, what kept us going, and all the learnings as well. But yeah, the moment when I quit my job and we knew, okay, this is time to move out of the home kitchens, which means more money. We have to pay ourselves now because we don't have a job anymore, which means more money. And we need to hire a team because we need to start working on this business now, and not, bake the biscuits and work in the business anymore. So more money. So that was like, how is that going to pan out? But it helped that we had obviously not paid ourselves a lot in the previous 3 years or 5 years up to that point almost. So we had a bit of a buffer, and we knew, okay, we have probably 3 months to, see if this works. And if not, we have to find another job again. And then that was that. And again, as always, I think as mums, you are quite resourceful, and we didn't have money, so we had no money to waste, which is also a good position to be in. So we did it a bit unconventionally, like we've done everything. So we hired people part-time. So rather than one person that, putting all eggs in one basket, we hired 3 people at 10 hours per week. They were mums, it suited them well. And the other thing we did is we didn't go and find a nice high street bakery. We went into the canteen of our old employer. So I had just quit the job, I knew the canteen was empty because of the pandemic, still kind of being, people working mainly from home. So we just asked the question, and he agreed and gave us a really good price. So we could move out of the home kitchen, operate from there, whilst keeping the costs really low. And that made all the difference, because then we could work on the business, make all those changes it desperately needed. And then the orders came in.
Yeah, and 12 months later, we moved out of that kitchen and we could fully fund our own commercial kitchen.
Saskia, there will be an awful lot of mums, women listening to this thinking, I have an idea for a business, but it's making that start. It's taking that first step, which for a lot of people just seems to be that impossible step. If you could give them one bit of advice, what would it be?
I tend to always say, give it your time. And the reality is that you might only have 30 minutes a day. Give it 30 minutes. The reality is that, within the start of 30 minutes a day, if it fuels you, if it makes you happy, if it brings you joy, if it ignites something, you will incrementally, as your children grow, as you you will find more time to work on it. And it might literally only be, 30 minutes, maybe every 6 months more. But I think give it the time you have. And if it brings you any kind of joy, if it ignites any spark, it's worth any amount of time that you spend on it. And before you know it, like us, you're 3 years down the line, and those 30 minutes have become something that you could never dream of.
Lisa?
Yeah, I would definitely second that, and add maybe that the first step is the hardest. And I think especially as women, we tend to hold ourselves back, and our imposter can be quite loud, and like, who are you to do this, or you could never do this, and all these voices. And that I'd encourage people to not listen to them and say, why not? Why shouldn't it work? And why are you not the right person for this? And almost flip it on its head. And I can safely say now, I've been in many rooms with business owners who are turning over multi-million businesses, which we're not. And they know no more than we do. Everybody is winging it. Everybody is making it up every single day. Of course, they have more experience in some areas, but you might have a lot of experience in one area, and that could be your superpower and your USP. And sometimes our difficulties and challenges can become our superpower. So I think for us being mums, for many people, that's maybe, oh God, I can't put as much time into it. But for us, that was our superpower, because we had to make the little time we had count. And So I'd say be brave, take that first step, and I don't think you'll look back.
And you can find the Biskery on all the usual social media channels. And if you're already signed up to our newsletter, or you sign up before the 30th of July, you'll get a discount code to use on biscuits from the Biskery, which will give you 20% off. You can find the link on our website, ajbellmoneymatters.co.uk, and click sign up to the newsletter.
And also with that newsletter, which we send out once a month, so no constant spamming you with stuff, you will get all of the latest articles, latest podcast episodes, special offers that we have once in a while, updates on when we've got events, basically everything that we're up to, and all of the useful financial stuff that you need to know. But this is always the point in the proceedings where I ask, did our guests share a financial confession?
They did, Laura, and here it is. Now, before I let you go, we have our confession. Saskia, I'm going to put you on the spot. What's yours?
Okay, here it goes. Before I moved to Leeds, I worked as a freelance journalist, and I did a really huge project in Switzerland. And my accountant at the time said that, you don't have to worry about paying VAT. It's all sorted. Don't worry about it. So I kind of had a pot of money. And when I moved to the UK, I was like, okay, I'm fine. I don't need to rush into a job. I've got some money on the side. And then I think it was within 2 months of me living here, I got a letter from the Dutch tax office saying, here's a bill for €8,000. We need to get that tax money back. I was like, oh, okay. So that was rough. That was very, very rough.
Lisa?
I thought long and hard, and the only thing I can think of is a bit wacky, but I once wrote a magical check to the universe after reading is it called The Secret? It's a good book, actually. It's like a 28-day course in gratitude, and obviously gratitude is really big for our business. We send out free biscuits every Tuesday to kind of encourage people to thank someone. So I read that book, and one chapter is about being grateful for the money you have and also being grateful for the money you don't even have. So they encouraged you to write down a sum for something you really want. And it was in the middle of COVID, and I was like, what I really want is a nice family holiday, like a proper luxurious holiday that I wouldn't normally go on. So I wrote down, I can't remember, £3,000. It's like £3,000 is what we'd need to have that holiday. And I wrote it down and I pinned it in my kitchen, and I looked at it every day, and they said every day, just look at it and say, thank you for the money. And I did that. And at that point, the business was still fairly small. And I think 4 weeks later, we got a big order. And to date, we hadn't had orders of that sort of size, and it was exactly that figure. And obviously that wasn't my money, but it was like, whoa, this is strange. So I should do that more.
Yes, you should.
Did you ever get the holiday?
It wasn't quite as luxurious, but we did get a holiday.
It was also COVID, yes. Couldn't even go anywhere.
I think that there's always this challenge when you go self-employed or when you're freelance, is navigating that tax side of it. We've had quite a few self-employed people on here saying that, they were ploughing on with building up a business or doing their work and got caught out by the tax side of things. So I think anyone going self-employed could probably learn from this. Either really swat up on your taxes or hire a really good accountant, even if it's just for the first couple of years, to guide you through that process.
And I like the idea of a magical check to the universe, Laura. I think you're probably quite cynical about such things, but I have to say that, I can see putting it out there, paying it forward, getting paid back. If I could stick a number on my fridge right now, it probably wouldn't be 3,000. It probably would have a few more zeros on it. Can we make that happen?
You may as well aim high. If you're going to do it, aim for the highest figure. But that is it for this episode. As Danny said, look us up on social media and get in touch if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions of topics you want us to cover or areas you want us to demystify. You can email us at hello@ajbellmoneymatters.co.uk. And just to say, if you're listening to this before the 16th of July, then check out our social media, because we are hosting a webinar with the team over at Noon at 6:30 p.m. on the 16th of July to talk all things pensions. So it's aimed at what Noon call their queenagers, so women in midlife. And if that's you, or family or friends who might be interested in it, then definitely sign up. And if you've missed that one, or if that topic's not for you, we're going to be hosting a couple more webinars in August and September. So definitely check out social media or sign up to our newsletter on the website to keep up to date with those.
Yeah, and until next time, thank you so much for listening.
Before you go, please remember this podcast is for educational purposes, and the views expressed don't necessarily reflect those of AJ Bell. The podcast isn't telling you if a certain investment is suitable or not. Don't forget that the value of investments can change, and you can lose money as well as make it. It's also important to remember that how you're taxed will depend on your individual circumstances, and rules can change. The way an investment performed in the past may not be the same as how it behaves in the future. If you want help, go see a qualified financial advisor.